Well, welcome back to the Dallas Bankers Club show. I'm Dean Rosencrans, host and founder of the Dallas Bankers Club. Today I have a really interesting topic, one that's near and dear to me that I thought I would share with you all. The Dallas Bankers Club is a network of professionals in the banking and finance business, and occasionally we get laid off, or certain things happen within our careers that we weren't expecting. And so I have been thinking about this show for a long time and wanted to share with you some of my personal thoughts behind being laid off, because I've gone through this myself, and wanted to bring some folks onto the show that may be helpful to you as you're going through this time. And even for any general loss, we all go through emotions that we've not felt before, and sometimes it's very difficult to deal with a layoff, a sudden layoff. So Leigh is a licensed professional counselor that has spent her educational and professional career with a focus on understanding human behavior, the role of the brain that it plays in the human behavior, and how that behavior can be modified utilizing neurofeedback, biofeedback, and cognitive behavior therapy. Leigh has completed her didactic training for neurofeedback at the University of North Texas and a Master's of Science in Counseling. So welcome to the show. And by the way, Leigh has her own show here and is a host of In Your Head. And we can talk more about that. And she's also an author of Brain On, Game On. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. My next guest, Ernesto Miranda, is principal at a architectural firm here in Dallas called Magellan Architects. He was one of the co-founders of the firm, and they're a commercial architectural firm with offices in California, Texas, and Washington. Many of the projects are workplace, retail, restaurants, educational, worship, industrial, and aviation. Ernesto, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So I really want to start off with this topic of being laid off and kind of maybe starting it out with my own personal issue that I was faced with a couple years ago, where I was laid off. And, I wasn't expecting it. Most people, when they're laid off or have sudden loss, it is sudden, right? Mm-hmm. They don't know what's going to happen. And for me, I wasn't prepared. Show up one day and walk into the office, and Human Resources is on the phone along with my manager, and I pretty much knew what was going to happen next. But, it's interesting how you feel at that time. I checked out. I can't even remember the conversation. I mean, I could see my manager's mouth moving, and I know that there was a voice on the phone, but it was kind of like one of those Charlie Brown teacher voices. Wah, 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 wah. And having left the house an hour and a half later, I'm back at the house. And my wife is like, "What are you doing home?" And it's like, I just got laid off. So, it's not necessarily what happened during, it's what happened after. And what I want to talk about today is those emotions that my colleagues within the banking space or friends and family that are going through something like this, really, that at the end of the day, it will get better, right? However, there are going to be certain emotions that you go through. And Leigh, I want to ask you, as a professional counselor, and having dealt with individuals probably in a similar case, what are some of the emotions that are very recognizable in a sudden loss like this.
So, when you're laid off, it's a loss, and you're grieving for what you had. And there's a grief cycle that we go through, whether it's the loss of a family member or a job, and you go through a variety of emotions. Anger is a big one.
Yeah.
Denial is another. Depression. Mm-hmm. Once we go through denial, then we get depressed about it. And then on the other side is acceptance. But it takes a while to get through and get to the other side. And when when you lose your job, you've lost your personal identity.
Right.
Where do I go?
Right.
What do I do during the day?
Right. It is, I hate to say it, but for a lot of us, our identity is so wrapped up in our job. We're, in a lot of cases, we are the chief breadwinner of the household. Mm-hmm. We're spending 15, 16, 17 hours thinking about our job, doing our job. It doesn't end at 5 o'clock most of the time. And when it's gone, it's such a void that, and I'll tell you, and we talked about this, Leigh and Ernesto, that for the first time in my entire life, after that layoff, did I feel my age. I'm like, oh my gosh, because I didn't feel as old as I was until that point in time.
But at that point in time, your age is a huge factor.
Yeah,
it is.
You see it right after as well.
That's right.
When you're looking for a position.
Well, so Ernesto, let's talk a little bit about how we met and why I asked you to be on the show. So, sure. We have a common connection in Denise Nolan with Material Supply, and she thought it would be good for us to meet and part of that discussion, I'm a pretty open person, and we started talking about this show that I was going to have with Leigh, and you had shared with me your personal journey going through a layoff.
Yeah.
And so I thought it would be good to have somebody else's, somebody that was actually in the trenches as well.
Sure.
Because it doesn't just happen to bankers, it happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how the same emotions happen, right? So tell me a little bit about what happened to you and,
sure.
and how you kind of owned it and dealt with it and got through that time.
Back in 2008, 2009, when the financing banking crashed, was really what happened to most of the architecture and interior design community.
Right.
Projects shut down almost the very next day. Funding shut down, probably 1 or 2 days after that. So everybody was scrambling around to see what was going to happen.
Right.
And a lot of firms weren't really well diversified in their portfolio, meaning that they were really stacked up like 90% commercial and 10% municipal. And so once all that dried up, making payroll the next couple weeks or 3 weeks was pretty detrimental to those firms. And so you start seeing a trickling of people being laid off every Friday at design firms. It was almost like you would get an email or
Sure.
a Facebook and like, oh yeah, it just happened. They just laid 5 of us off.
You're right.
And I knew at one point or another I was going to get to our firm very quickly. Just wasn't sure who it was going to be. And just similar to you, Dean, you get your boss saying, hey, let's go have a conversation. You're like, damn it, I know what's coming.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. You're there and you just hear the mumbling and you're thinking, what's going to happen to me and everything else. And so, same thing with my wife. My wife was wondering, well, why are you home so early? And
what do I do with you?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, she was working, so I called her immediately. But it was funny because for me, I knew just being at home, I'm never good at working at home. I'll be the first one to put on ESPN, and then all of a sudden I get distracted, and
Sure.
I can't do that. So one of the very first things I did was I was talking to one of my friends, Holly, who had just gotten laid off. And so we said, well, why don't we meet with a group of us, see if we could start networking with whatever positions are available and kind of support each other. And we met at a local Magellan, and there was like 6 of us there at first, and then the next week there was 10. The next week after that was 20, and we had to move to a bigger location, and
Right.
then it just kept growing,
Right.
week after week. We would get, every Friday I would get a report before I went to talk to everybody. Hey, 6 people got laid off over here, and 10 people got laid off over there.
You're right.
And so that ability for us to kind of start networking with each other and kind of share a little bit about that, and then seeing that same look of everybody's face as they're walking in through the doors, we started being able to kind of help them kind of transition into it. Hey, this isn't the end of the world. You just got to snap out of it. And, we need to help each other. And I would try to make it a point to meet each individual came in and do a one-on-one so I could understand who they were. They could understand who I was.
Right.
So eventually we grew the group to about 120, 140 people. We had bigger roles, but every week I started realizing I was giving more motivational. And I have no background on the clinical side or motivational speaking.
Right.
But it was almost like I was kind of thrust
you dealt
in
with
there.
it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Life experience. There's
Exactly
nothing
right.
better.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
so from that standpoint, it later on helped me because I was able to know a great deal amount of people in the industry that I would have probably never met before, and it also kind of gave me a sense of place. And besides looking for a job, but also I had this to look forward, and I was accountable to somebody.
Well, and it most likely, the initial, I would think, few networking events that you put on were, pardon the French, but probably bitch fests.
A little bit.
Dang them, dang you, dang those that were left behind, and everybody else that you try to shut out, and you try to justify or rationalize, I should say, why me?
Denial.
Absolutely.
And Leigh, one of the things I saw in your book was, so true about how these types of things affect your brain, right?
They do.
And that I would think, so I tried to get myself out of this train of thought that I'm never going to be employed again. I'm never going to attain the level that I've attained again. You almost start thinking, well, maybe I can work by the hour.
Or career change.
Career change, exactly right.
Yeah.
But then you have to figure out what you're going to do next.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And oh my gosh, I had so many different hubby lists that my wife put together that, my house is now totally almost remodeled. I put literally 40 recessed lights in my house because I couldn't stop. I mean, it was like a nervous thing. It just kept my mind off of, being laid off and nothing else to do. And so if you walked into my house now, you turn the lights on and it's like this studio. It's like, oh my gosh. But Leigh, really I want to understand, or I want folks to understand from a counselor's perspective, how to cope with these emotions. I mean, you have to deal with them, but what's the best way to cope with it?
Well, you got to catch those little ants. And when I say ants, I mean automatic negative thoughts. And they go through your brain so quick, you don't even really realize it. It's just all of a sudden you're grumpy, or you're angry, or you're irritable. And so you have to we all have self-defeating thoughts. I got my 2 best friends. I've got the shoulds and the musts. I should do that. I must do that. And then I don't. And then I feel guilty.
Yeah, right.
That's not healthy. So, keeping your emotions in check during that time, it's almost like that's the most important time to do it. Because you've got to, negative thoughts create negative feelings, create negative behavior.
Right. That's absolutely correct. And finding some distraction. I mean, it's not like the emotion is going to go away.
No, but you had a sense of purpose.
Yes.
You had a purpose. You were going to relight your whole house.
That's right. That's right.
And you created the sense of community.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling ashamed, I've got to go, because I can't go to work.
Sure, yeah.
You created a sense of community where people felt welcome and almost proud to be part of it.
Yeah,
Right.
a band of brothers. In
Yeah.
essence.
That's right.
I think the other thing that I know for me, what I went through was, if I wasn't either online looking for a position or calling somebody or really chasing after somebody, if I did anything else, I had the biggest sense of guilt.
Sure.
That everything on my focus, even including my kids, you
Right.
know, going to some of their, I had the ability of going to some of their recitals or whatever during the day, and I would sit there and I would enjoy it, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I should be looking for a job.
Right.
That's that negative talk.
Yeah.
That negative chit chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes in so, like you said, so easily. And I will say, I mean, just from an experience standpoint, I think if I could go back in time and tell me something, that would have been the very first thing, is that go see somebody, go talk to somebody.
Right.
Because I think if I would have done that, like let's say gone to someone like you or another counselor or I think I would have been able to get over that much faster than me being proud and saying, no, I can take care of this. I'm the man of the house. There's so much like negativity on that you just don't realize.
Well, when I mentioned that I felt my age, if I felt as if I didn't have many more changes that I could go through career-wise. So when you're younger, you can, okay, fine, I got laid off. I'll go find another job. I've got 35 more years to work, or whatever the case may be. But when you're a little older and you look at that number that's left, it's like, I don't have the ability or time to change too many more times. So that starts going through your brain.
Yeah.
Leigh, you had mentioned something when we were talking initially about the heavy emotion and sometimes suicidal thoughts maybe come into your head. And, it is very difficult. I mean, the irrational emotional side of when you're going through something like this is that, as you're driving home or as you're finally able to absorb what just happened, that, these crazy thoughts come into your brain. I'm worth more dead than I am alive, or, I could easily just pull over and hit that bridge abutment going 90 miles an hour. Those are thoughts that happen. And you had mentioned, or I had mentioned, that it is a thing in banking. If you were to Google suicide in banking, it does happen. I don't know if it's a regionalized thing or if it's just as you become more successful in a career and you make a little bit more, so you lever a little bit more. You buy a bigger house, you send your kids to private school, you do a lot of things that are financially motivated. And so when that comes crumbling down and that weight comes on, then, and maybe there isn't that second income, maybe the wife doesn't work or the husband doesn't work, whatever the case may be, that it's like, I'm going to check out.
Well, you have those thoughts, I'm worthless, running through your head anyway. Well, I'm worthless. And then you say, well, I got to look at the bills. And you go, wow. Yeah. How am I going to cover that? Where's that money going to come from? And you think, well, I've got this life insurance policy. And, once that brain starts spiraling down into that deep, dark hole, it's really hard to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a wife that was very supportive. However, like you, Ernesto, I shut in, right? And, I mean, she knew what was going on, obviously, and I know she was stressed. And I'm trying to be as strong as I can be to show this facade that, it's all going to be all right. I mean, there's plenty of jobs out there and I'll be fine. I'm Dean Rosencrantz, I can find any job, whatever the rationale was. And but without her support, I mean, she saw what was going on. She really she took that role as motivator, etc. And like you, I probably should have gone to somebody like Leigh to begin with, because a lot of bankers, it isn't just that emotional time right there and then. There's usually a lot of baggage in addition to, we're not thinking about spending the money, but, it's the, maybe there's some other losses in your life. Maybe in my case, I took a pretty big hit financially from an investment, right? So you're just kind of biding time. You're hoping that, okay, my job seems to be secure, but with time, all the other things will get better. Well, when those other things aren't getting better, maybe it's your marriage, maybe it's all the other stuff that are causing some anxiety in your life, and then you get hit with this. Boy, you get real anxiety and real depression. And, for me, it was difficult. I was not sleeping. I ended up going to my doctor and just said, I need something. I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you, as my doctor, I need something. And so, he prescribed, I don't even know what it was, for a short period of time to get me, because I was having heart palpitations and
the anxiety
couldn't
is real.
sleep, the whole drill. So,
And all that's your autonomic nervous system. And that's a normal thing, because this is your central nervous system, this is your autonomic nervous system, and which has got two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And you want to stay in that optimal window, and you're like on a roller coaster with, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. When you're anxious, you're more irritable and worried, and when you go depressed, you go more numb and hopeless. But when you're going up and down like that, it takes a toll on your body.
Yeah. Well, so staying active, this is one of those things that I really want my colleagues that have gone through this or going through this is that get out there and talk to people. It is somewhat of a antiseptic when you're talking to somebody that you've never met before, and just kind of hearing their stories. And
sometimes that's a little easier.
Yeah, exactly right. I can share with a perfect stranger all the things that I'm broadcasting out to the one person that watches the show. What I went through, and I'm not going to go all the way down into the testimonial of all this, but sometimes talking to a stranger is more therapeutic than trying to talk to your wife, because you're not trying to put off any airs to a stranger about I'm successful or wherever, but when you're talking to a friend, you don't necessarily want your friend to know that I feel like a failure, right? Because sometimes the friend doesn't even know how to react.
Most people don't know how to react.
That's right.
Although I think a lot of people have gone through it.
That's right.
They just don't know how to react. I think that sense of, I guess, lowering your shield.
You're so vulnerable. And you just don't, you're either vulnerable or you're overwhelmed.
Right.
It's one of the two.
So, there's a season for us in banking that we go through. There's a time of, usually when things happen in our industry, it's after a bonus or something like that. So you'll see a lot of bankers being redeployed in March or April. But when you're laid off months in advance of that season of hiring, what are some of your additional recommendations for some of these folks? What should they be doing to prepare?
I think you hit the nail on the head with be social. We are social animals. We need to be around other people. The last thing you want to do is isolate yourself. That makes you more depressed. I think, too, be physical. The brain needs movement. Exercise creates endorphins. Endorphins make you feel better. Focus on your sleep. And what happens a lot is people will sleep too much because that's a coping skill. I can't think about this. I'm just going to go to sleep. And that's a better coping skill than many others. But focus on that sleep, because you need the right amount. And, almost take it to basics.
What is the right amount?
Well, most people agree it's 7 to 8 hours.
Okay.
And then you'll find people that say, I get 3 hours worth of sleep and I am perfect to go all day. Good for you. Not me.
Well, what happens if you have too much sleep?
That's what I think a lot of times people with depression do. You just turn it off. It's easier because you don't want to cope with the real world. And that changes your metabolism.
That dream state seems to be better than reality.
Absolutely. But what I always say, you've got to embrace your situation, lean into it, because the only way you're going to get through it is leaning into it.
Right.
Trying to hide, stick your head in the sand, nothing's going to change.
Right. You know, what I had found going through this process is, I tried to be as active as I could, but I was relying too much on others to do for me what I should have been doing for myself. Example, I'll just hire a recruiter, and the recruiter will do everything for me, and I'll just lay everything off onto that person. Well, you dig yourself even further into a depression when you put so much reliability on somebody like that, and those opportunities are lost out to somebody else, right? So you really didn't put a lot of emotion into hiring that person, but yet the stakes were pretty high. And so when they actually align you with another bank or another employer, and they tell you all the things that you want to hear, but in reality you weren't really the right fit for that particular opportunity, and you didn't get the offer, it just even puts you deeper into a hole.
Because you have that negative voice saying, geez, not even a recruiter could get me a job.
Right.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. And then just the process of going through job interviews, that interview, you're there, and nowadays they have the virtual interviews as well, so you're going through that as well at home. And then you keep getting told no and no, especially during our time when, it was almost impossible to find something on the architecture and interior design side. So it was like every single time it was always a rejection, or we'll keep your resume, but we just don't have anything right now.
Right. Yeah.
And that starts compounding those negative thoughts even more. Like, geez, I'm doing everything I think I can. I still keep getting no's. I can't even get my foot in the door.
Yeah.
So it's, again, those compounding thoughts.
Right.
And again, it goes back to, and I think I'm not, being a proponent of it, but like I said before, I think if I would have been smart, gone to a counselor first.
Yeah.
And then really right myself in order for me to keep that same thought process. Because I agree, Leigh, I went through those same emotions,
Absolutely. And those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
They just keep spinning in your head.
Yeah.
And when you talk about them, you lay them on the table and somebody says, really? Did you just say this?
You're right.
Yeah.
And you say it back to them and they go, no. Yeah, you did. You got to get it out of your head.
Yeah, it's your reality at that moment.
Yeah.
And then some of your closest friends just don't even know how to react to that.
Right.
So.
Well, you had made, one thing for sure is don't make big decisions during this time, right?
That's for sure.
Or try to avoid them.
Or try to avoid them.
Sometimes
right.
you can't.
But, I got to pull the kids out of college. I got to sell the house, sell the cars,
Don't
slow down.
overreact.
Don't overreact.
Yeah.
And that was certainly, you're trying to balance all this stuff in your brain anyway.
Yeah.
And so you do have a worst case scenario, you do have a contingency plan, but that's one of the things that I really tried to avoid was, okay, we're not selling the house.
Yeah. I went overboard on all the little things. Like, my wife had a pretty good job, and so it wasn't like it was like a lot of people where you're all of a sudden you're worried about the mortgage and everything else. Yeah, we worried. But I started doing little things like there was a point there where I remember going shopping with my family and I refused to get anything for myself.
Right.
And that was a constant thing as I was going through this. I just didn't feel like I was worthy. Yeah. That there was no way that I'm
still
contributing
bleeds over today.
That I don't that I don't want to take away from the family.
And that was one thing you could control.
Yeah. Correct. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So it's little things like that that creep up, I think, on you.
One of the things, it isn't just about those that get laid off. So I went through when I was with Wells Fargo, as an example, and during that 2008 time frame, we bought a large bank, right? So we're going through a credit crisis, and I got to be honest with you, I am so fortunate to be living in Texas in the banking industry, because to a certain degree we were buffered by a strong economy here versus in Seattle, where I moved from, or other parts of the country. But Wells purchased Wachovia Bank, and there was a lot of overlap with those two institutions here in Texas. So we had to do these re-interview process and be equitable in some Wachovia employees, some Wells Fargo employees. But somewhere somebody's going to get laid off to make room for the other, right? And so as those things are happening and you're watching it happen and you're left behind, still working, you feel like you're a dead man walking, right? It's
when is it going to be my turn?
My turn.
Yeah.
So even more anxiety comes into play, and it's building up. And it's building and building. It could be, maybe it would have been best if I was laid off in the initial stage.
Right.
That way I could have dealt with it versus this long, protracted emotional roller coaster over 6 months to a year, and then it finally happens. And sometimes a lot of folks are more proactive in, well, I'm going to go find a job before they get to me. Well, that isn't always the best thing either. It's like, well, you could be leaving a good job, and maybe the thing that is left after the fact, 2-3 years down the road, is a better place to be than jumping to another grass is greener kind of scenario, which never works out.
Yeah.
Leigh, so I know people have told me this many times. There's 7 emotions or 10 emotions to expect. Seems like I was just stuck on a few, but maybe I did go through all of them. Can you tell us what all of them are?
Well, I think, I think you did go through all of them.
Right.
I mean, happiness has different levels.
Sure.
Sadness, some people get sad, they get disgusted. Not everybody. Fear is definitely an emotion. I think it's part of anxiety. Some people will say, I'm anxious. Some people will just say, I'm afraid. I'm just afraid all the time.
Right.
So I think that, and some people actually recognize that they're grieving. It hurts my heart. Every time I drive by that building, and I used to work there, it hurts.
Right.
So I think that we experience all of them. We just try to put them in a little box that we're okay with.
Right.
I'm okay being sad, but I don't want to be disgusted. And I'm okay being anxious, but I am not afraid.
Right.
So I think that's why people tend to limit them.
Yeah. And one emotion that was in there that eventually happened was forgiveness.
And that's the best.
Yeah. It wasn't, wow, I don't even want to see those people. They just scorned me. And, but it wasn't a personal decision, right? It was a business decision, but it felt personal at the time.
Well, you bring up a really good point with forgiveness, because I encourage people, when you're going through a loss, tap into that spiritual side, whatever that is. If it's God, Buddha, Allah, whatever it is,
Right.
Tap into that spiritual side and believe in the higher power.
That's right. Well, positive thinking does change the brain, and I'll give you an example. So as I'm going through these losses of investment and losses of a job or whatever, I started listening to a radio station, and I don't want to plug it, but Joel Osteen is somebody that I now listen to. And, I go to church and I'm spiritual, but, I haven't, until you experience a loss, and you're always asking God, please help me. Help me get through this. And, those are just like, emergency prayers type of thing that, you have to really kind of build into this. And so I started listening to Joel Osteen, and in the car, but not just from the standpoint of from my drive to work, but anything in my car is Joel Osteen. And I've got them all kind of memorized now. There's like 800 episodes or whatever. But it's all positive thinking. And it's that positiveness that it's always on. It's something that you can just build upon, that it really helped me get through a lot of this. And now I've got, and I don't know exactly when the light switch flipped for me, as far as I started feeling better, or I started not forgetting, but burying the...
Letting go.
Letting go.
Yeah.
I don't know when that exactly happened, but it happened. And now I'm pretty good with it, right? I feel like, okay, all is good. Kids are happy. Wife is happy. Probably better off that the wife is happy than I'm happy. But just that positive thinking, it does work.
It does work. And actually, I've gone through a loss recently, the tornado that came through.
Oh, really?
Took my office and everything in my office. And so I've developed my mantra. I will come back bigger and better and
That's
stronger.
Right.
And that makes me feel really good.
Yeah.
And I say it probably too many times every day, but it makes me feel good. It makes me feel more in control and more capable.
Right.
Positive thoughts, mantras, affirmations,
Right.
all are so helpful.
Right. And the other thing that, and I think you and I talked about this as well, but when you're staying active, maybe stay active in a positive way from the standpoint of volunteering. Volunteer at a shelter, volunteer for low income, maybe build somebody's, Habitat for Humanity type thing. I went to Puerto Rico a couple weeks ago, or actually a month ago, through our church. It was an adult mission trip, and we went down to help rebuild homes affected by the hurricane. Well, we're talking 2 years later, right? But the feeling of just, you have empathy and all the other things for the others that were affected by it, but you start to realize how much you really have, even though you lost your job, and being thankful for what you have. Yeah. And so a recommendation that I would have to my colleagues is there's a lot of volunteer organizations out there. Get out, get involved.
They're easy to find. There is a website called volley.org, VOLY.org, and you can go in and put your zip code in, and it will tell you what volunteer positions are out there. Because a lot of people will say, I don't know what to do, and I don't really go to church, and, I don't know what to do.
Right.
Well, that's no excuse.
Right.
If you want to find something to do,
that's
you
right.
can.
There's plenty to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that gives you that sense of reward. And so when you're going in for those interviews, and they, be honest and say, I was laid off, or, you can see, people can see through the facade of, I think I understand what happened here. You got laid off. Let's just kind of throw it out there. But what have you been doing since? And just say, hey, I've accepted this, and I'm moving forward with my life, and I've been volunteering and getting involved in our community. And you can imagine what the hiring manager would look at, how they would look at that, like, wow, this is
positive attitude.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want that guy on my team, or lady.
Yeah, versus, their loss, they screwed me. I hate them.
It was their fault.
Their fault.
Yeah.
So, listen, I really appreciate you both being on my show. And, what I would suggest to my colleagues that are going through this is reach out to somebody.
Absolutely.
Right?
Other than your spouse.
Yeah, don't lay it on their doorstep all the time.
Yeah, I would still, recommend people seek out a counselor. I really do.
Leigh is available.
That was the biggest mistake. I'm not touting Leigh, but...
Well, you can if you want to.
But I think it would be wise, if you are going through this, immediately start seeing somebody.
Right.
And that's coming from somebody who's actually gone through that whole deep darkness.
Ernesto, the fact that you did something with your group. So I have the Dallas Bankers Club, and there's quite a few members there. So what I'm now, after this show, and what I've been thinking about is maybe just having another Dallas Bankers Club where it's come all that have gone through this process in my industry anyway.
Yeah.
Keep it at the banker level. And, these are the types of things that keep them motivated, right? And we can commiserate and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's just you have connections. And for those that are going through this, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. You all know that. This will be posted on LinkedIn. At the end of this segment, your contact information will be on there. Your contact information will be on there. If you need recommendations for counseling, if you need recommendations for volunteer work, if you need recommendations for other banks that potentially may be hiring, reach out to me, because that's what the Dallas Bankers Club, to a certain degree, why I put it together, was so that we can stay together and recognize when somebody's suffering or when somebody needs a new position, that we're all connected and we don't have to go through this rigmarole of, hiring a recruiter. Or I'm not putting down recruiters at all. They serve a function.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they get you a job, they're great.
They're the greatest people in the world.
If they don't.
That's right. But don't just rely on them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And that's been, the way we ended up doing that group is just they're a tool.
That's right.
Look at it that way.
That's right.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would take away is just the one thing that I do remember from the group is now, if let's say, and there's several people that were from the group who are now at pretty senior levels.
Sure.
And I know for a fact that if I call them, no matter what, they're going to pick up the phone. And I'm going to do that the same to those members if they call me.
Right.
Even some of the sales reps, that came through there.
That's right.
I've always told them, you above anybody has a direct line to me. I will always pick up the phone for you guys.
Right.
And it almost gives you that camaraderie that you would have normally with other people.
Right.
Because everybody's kind of gone through the same thing.
Right.
And that could be really powerful in those kind of numbers.
That's right.
That you're able to still talk to each other. Just recently, a couple of years ago, we had a little celebration of the group, but it was more about like, okay, so what are you doing? And all of these people are amazing architects and designers. There's one of them who's one of the top people over at 7-Eleven. There's a couple other top people at some of the other firms, and it was like a being thankful, like
Sure.
this is where we were at. Now look at us. This is what you guys have been able to achieve. Yeah. So it's good in that type of group to celebrate as well, the little ones. I've found that out as being an entrepreneur that, got to celebrate the little things and stop and smell the roses.
That's right.
But keep moving.
Well, stop and smell the roses, but appreciate the things you have. Yeah. Appreciate your family.
Always.
Right? So, that was the other thing, too, and we didn't touch upon this, and we have a few more minutes to talk about this, was the effects that losing your job has on your kids, right? So depending on how old they are, they understand what may be happening. And they oftentimes are going through the same emotions that you're going to be going through. Well, Daddy lost his job. And so they start thinking in their own rational thoughts how to cut back on what they're doing. And well, we don't have the money for that, Dad. And it's like, listen, you don't need to be worrying about money as our child, right? Let us do that. But invariably, they do worry about the family situation. And so for me, I just loved on them as much as I could. Just let them know that Daddy's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. This is how it is. And when you get older, you'll understand. But, just don't worry about it, right? And so for those that have younger kids, just love on your kids, love on the family as much, because you may not get that much time between now and getting your new job. Take advantage of it.
Absolutely. And think about, too, the behavior that you're modeling. If your kids see you, down and out and stressed and so anxious, that's going to, I guess I should feel that way. Yeah. That's the way you feel. So think about the behavior that you're modeling.
Yes, exactly. You know what I do, I wish I would have done is, I could have taken more advantage of trying to lose weight.
I'm right there with you.
I don't know why I did. I still came. Yeah. I went in fat, came out fat.
Because you feel guilty. You feel guilty. Why am I at the gym? I should be looking for a job.
That's right.
There you go.
Exactly right.
I mean, you do.
Exactly. Well, listen, let's go ahead and wrap this up. That's another segment of the Dallas Bankers Club show. I hope it's helpful. And I hope that if you are experiencing these things, that just remember that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Life isn't over. You are not identified by your job. You are identified by who you are, characteristically being raised in your own families, etc. So don't take it personal. Get out there, be active, and you will find another role, whether it's in banking or whatever the other passion in your life is. So with that, thank you to my guests, and we'll be seeing you at another Dallas Bankers Club event. Hopefully we'll have one in the next few months, but until I see you again, cheers.